Good morning. Good morning. First, this is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Yes.
So I'm very thankful to be standing here another morning, another day. And I am especially pleased to announce that we have a genealogist here in our midst. Renata Yarborough Saunders is the descendant of formerly enslaved ancestors, enslavers, and free people of color. She authors 2 blogs, Into the Light and Genia related, and produces a mostly African-American funeral programs online database. She is a member of the National Genealogical Society, the North Carolina Genealogical Society, and has served or is serving as its publicity director, the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society, where she is a member of the National Editorial Board and Vice President and newsletter editor for the Hampton Roads chapter. She has significant background in present association in genealogical societies, doing programming, working with colleges such as Norfolk State, the College of William and Mary. And Vanessa. She lectures on a variety of topics on the issue of genealogy, and we are especially pleased to have her here with us this morning. Thank you.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Rhonda, for that introduction.
You're welcome.
I'm really pleased to be here with you this morning. Let me make sure my phone is turned off. Or silence. I'm very pleased to be here with you. I'm very excited just because, as I was sharing earlier, with all the work that I do with genealogy and family history, I don't have a family reunion. None of my family lines have a reunion. So it's always very special to me to be invited either to speak or just to attend someone else's family reunion. And you guys are just so very fortunate. I'm going to jump right in because I have a lot to share with you this morning, and I do want to be respectful of your time. Rhonda, I do just want to check one thing since we're starting almost 15 minutes after. Can I? Okay, all right. Be about 45 or so more minutes. So, I'm here to share with you about researching your ancestors of color. And you probably recognize some of these photos that are on my title screen, as I have pulled them from your ancestry site that Christian has so diligently worked on. So if you see anybody you know up there, just wave and tell them hi.
I actually only know one of them.
Oh, okay. I decided not to put their names under the pictures. I figured anything you have questions about, you can ask Christian later. So to the Coles, Lemons, Meekins, Williams, Winfrey, and Woodson family, thank you for having me. So my objective today is to give you an introductory overview of some of the methodology and resources that are used for researching ancestors of color. And while I'm doing that, I hope to make some connections to your CLMWWW family along the way. So in the beginning, I just want to talk a little bit about how, you okay? Okay, you sure? I saw them arms go up. That happened to me recently and everybody kept walking. So just to talk a little bit about how to get started with researching our ancestors of color. I know there are probably people in here, especially Christian, who this will not be any new information for, but I just wanted to make sure that we all kind of start off on the same foot. So, researching ancestors of color is just like researching any types of ancestors, regardless of race. We always start with what we already know. So you begin with yourself and you work yourself backwards to create a tree or a pedigree chart that shows you, your parents, your grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever's names and information you already know. Even if you just know a first name, or you don't even know a name, but you say, my mama always said we were from Lewisburg, North Carolina, just put Lewisburg, North Carolina on the tree. And this is going to be the basis that you work your way out from as you gather more information about your family. Once you have that bare bones tree set up, begin to interview family members, and it is really important that you get to the elders first for reasons that I probably don't need to explain. I also encourage you to talk to family members who may be struggling with a terminal illness or anything like that, so that you can get their input ahead of time. Use audio and video recording, which is very easy for us these days because we all have cell phones, and pay attention to any oral history, or what we refer to usually as family lore. Even though these stories that may have been passed down over, decades or centuries even, may not be completely true, there's usually at least a grain of truth to each story. So always make sure you record, write down, however way you want to notate it, any stories that are shared with you. Then you want to start to use the very wide array of free online access and local libraries, as well as family history centers that are sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they're in every community around the world, and give you free access to all of the records that you would pay for on Ancestry and that kind of thing. So there's going to be a family history center near you, no matter where you live, to start building an initial record base to go with the names that you have on your tree. And also begin to create timelines for each of your ancestors or ancestral lines. It can be tedious to do it for each person, so some people like to do it by family or by surname, but just make sure you're creating timelines as you go along. So you're building that record base, and most of us like to begin with what we call vital records, which would be birth, marriage, and death records. Those are going to be the easiest records for you to find about your more current day ancestors. And then as you work your way back, you find a birth certificate for your aunt, and it's going to have her parents' name on it. So that takes you back another generation to those parents. So then you start researching those parents. You find their birth certificate, their marriage certificate, their death certificate. That's going to give you their parents' name. So that takes you back another generation. So that's why we like to start there. And remember that all this time, everything you're finding, you're adding it to that tree, or if you, you're adding the names, the dates, and the locations to the tree. But you also need to have a note-taking system, whether it's online or you keep composition notebooks, or whichever way you prefer to keep notes. That's what the timeline is for. So you keep adding that information that you're finding about your ancestors. Now, along with vital records, I always encourage people to look for 20th century military records. And again, we're talking about the ancestors that are closer, like our parents and our grandparents. Specifically, World War I and World War II draft registration cards. They will give you a lot of additional information about your ancestors, because remember, we don't want to just have a tree with names and dates. We would like to get stories about our ancestors. And so this is giving you a story. My ancestor registered for the draft. Now, was he drafted? That's the next thing you want to find out. And I wanted to just use this one as a quick example of another type of story that you might find out, that I found out about my family in my 30 years of research. This is the record for William Adam Green. He was my second great-granduncle. And when I started my research and I started interviewing people, I started interviewing relatives that I didn't even know I had. My Green family relatives were telling me that part of the reason I didn't know about a lot of them is because we had a section of this family that moved away to New York and was passing as white. And I had no idea. So they specifically told me about this William Adam Green. He was like the main one. He was the first one to go. And then he brought some of his siblings and his nieces and nephews up, and they did the same thing. So when I found this World War I draft registration card and I saw that the race on it was white, At first, I thought it wasn't my ancestor because I wasn't really believing the family lore, but everything else about it, the other information, the date of birth, where he was from, his wife's name, who was white, and all of these other things matched up with what I, knew about him. And so I found, yes, this actually is my second great-grand uncle, and this document helped to verify that family lore that he was passing as white. For Christian and anyone else who's doing the work, I also want to point out that the corners are intact on this form. The World War I draft registration cards in most locations were to be cut at the corners if the person was black. So this was just another indication to me that that wasn't a mistake, that this person, William Green, had registered as a white man. Now, by contrast, here's another one of the people from my tree who is, you can see the corners are cut off. And you can somewhat see there was actually a line there for them to cut on so that they would cut them off. Because remember, the military was still segregated. So this is how they knew which way to send people. And you can see that Claire Cephas Hill is denoted as Negro. So that's just something else for you to be looking out for if you're the one or the ones who are doing this work. So once we get that vital information and that 20th century military information, we almost all then go to the census. Now don't go to the census before you've done those steps, because you're gonna get a lot of people with the same names, you're gonna get yourself confused, you're gonna be putting people on your tree who don't belong on your tree. So just exercise some restraint and don't go to the census too early. The most recent census available is from 1950. Census records, or federal census, has been taken every 10 years since 1790. And they are released after 72 years. So we just got the 1950 census in April of 2022. We're very excited about that. So the same way that you started with yourself and you worked backwards and you filled that tree in from what you knew to what you want to find out, you do the same thing with the census. You start with the most recently available census. So you're gonna have everybody in here, our parents were born in 1950 and some of us were too. So you're gonna look for yourself, look for your parents, look for all your known relatives, document where they were, what their occupations were, who lived in the household. I guarantee you, you're gonna find people you didn't know about. Who were they? Get their ages, their birth, place of birth, parents' place of birth. All this is on the census. So keep documenting, 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 and make your way backwards through the census years, all the way back to 1880. Now, you notice that 1890 is gray and has a line through it. Does anybody know why? There was a fire. Very good. All of the, not all, most of the 1890 federal census was burned in a fire in Washington, D.C. and was destroyed. So there are only a few fragments from a few locations around the country that survived, and most of us will not find our ancestors in the 1890 census. So you get back to 1880, you keep going backwards, you're adding people, adding facts, adding stuff, and then you get to 1870. Now, the 1870 census has a very bad reputation in African American genealogy research, but I'm trying to do everything that I can to change that reputation. It's known as the 1870 brick wall. I'm hoping that I'll be able to crumble that wall for you as we look at why there's another way to see it. So the 1870 census is the first federal census taken after emancipation. So it's the first time that all people, including people who were formerly enslaved, are being enumerated by name on the census. We've all been on the census since 1790. Everybody, black, white, green, yellow. But the only people who were named were the people who were the head of the household. Everyone else was a tick mark under a category for their age, their gender, and their status as free or enslaved. But we were on there. But when you get to 1870, everyone is on there. So we use this 1870 census as a baseline to establish the information about our ancestors who had been formerly enslaved. What age do they say they are? Where are they located? Who's in the household? What occupation do they have? Where does it say their parents were born? Make sure you squeeze every bit of information you can out of that 1870 census, but while you're doing it, don't forget that it might not, none of it might not be true. First of all, this is the first time for many formerly enslaved people that they're being asked how old they are. They've never really had to even think about, well, when was my birthday? They might not know their birthday, so they're guessing. They may not know where their parents were born. They may not know who their parents were. So you have to take this information and then you have to continue to research it so that you can corroborate it through other documentation. Ma'am, you had a question? Yes.
Census records, have they been digitized where you can just go to a website and access them? Or?
Yes, they're available in many different places, but if you have an Ancestry.com account, you can get them there and link them right to your tree. But FamilySearch.org is a free service by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you can research all of these records there for free.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So when you're doing this work with the 1870, you find the ancestor that you know about, or ancestors, study the neighborhood around them. We call that cluster research. You'll be looking for other family names that you know, but you'll also be looking at common surnames to whatever the one is your ancestors using, and forenames, which is first names. And the reason for that is, and I saw this a lot on your family tree, names were used over and over again in families. So my brother and I might have chosen a different surname after emancipation, but he might be living right down the street from me. And so you see my household with the name Yarborough, and you see this other household with the name Coles, but both of the households have Arthur, Renata, Edgar, and Henry in them. Why? They're being named after the same grandparents, the same aunts and uncles, the same cousins, and those names are being reused. So hold on to those names because they may be your family members. And also it's important to know that formerly enslaved people did not always, they did not even usually take the surname of their last owner. The numbers right now are that only happened about 15% of the time. So if you're like me and you don't have anything else to go by, when I started, I knew nothing but Yarborough. I started with my Yarborough line. So that's the name I researched. But if you know something else, or if one of those interviews you did suggested that there was another name, you might need to research some other names. But if you don't, just research the name that you know. Okay, so milk that 1870 census dry, get everything you can out of it, take good notes, and then keep going back. Remember, we're going back. So go back to the 1860 and the 1850. These are two very important years because in 1850 and 1860, the census enumeration changed to where all free persons were to be named and enumerated in the census, regardless of color. So remember, before that it was just tick marks in a category. Now we've got the names of all free people. And so if you don't find your ancestors in 1850 or 1860, then it's likely that they have been enslaved. And your research is going to take a particular path. If you do find them in 1850 or 1860, they're free. They're free before emancipation. They're free people of color. And so we're going to be talking about the two different paths that this research would take based on what that 1870, that wonderful, glorious 1870 census that's not a brick wall, is indicating to you. You're now going to think of the 1870 census as a fork in the road. So what do? Well, we're either researching ancestors who appear to have been enslaved, or we're researching ancestors who we find to have been free people of color. Now, before we start looking at documents, there are a few little guidelines I want you to go by. Christian, I hope that you're gonna get some incentive out of some of this to further the wonderful research that you've been doing. So first of all, when you're looking at the documents, you have to have an analytical mind. You have to make sense of everything you see on the documents, and you have to confirm and corroborate any information that's on the document. So just because it's on a piece of paper, it doesn't mean that it's correct. Study everything with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure you pay attention to any names on every document, whether they're witnesses, bondsmen, whatever reason they're on there. You will have to then research those people too, to determine what their connection is to your ancestor, and also because you may possibly find more records that mention your ancestors as you're studying these people who are in what we call the FAN club. It stands for Friends, Associates, and Neighbors. It's also crucial that you understand the laws of the time and place that you are researching. Now, if Granddaddy was born in 1801 and he died in 1870, the laws in 1801 are not the same as in 1870, so you gotta know the laws throughout his lifespan so that you understand why things happened, why he made decisions he made, why things were done to him the way they were, or whatever. So 3 categories. Property laws. Our enslaved ancestors were chattel property. You've got to know the laws that pertain to them. Our free people of color ancestors, many of them owned property. You've got to know the laws that pertain to them. Laws of coverture. These have to do with the laws relating to women, particularly married women owning property. You must understand those laws. And then slave laws, black codes, any kind of laws that were in place to govern the lives of of people of color, you must be aware of what those were and when they were in effect. So here is the first document with two of your ancestors, well, some of your ancestors on it. You may recognize the name Albert Williams. Albert Williams was married at this time in 1870 to Mary Jane, and they have what looks like 4 children. I say that because relationships are not given on the 1870 census, but you may know from your research that these are their children. And then they have a woman in the home, Sarah Williams, who's 74 years old, who I'm gonna guess is either Albert's mother or grandmother. But again, that's Christian's job to do. Now, I'm gonna be showing you some documents from your family, but I was not paid to research your family, and you have a big family. So I have had to refrain, like some of it is very enticing, like I really do wanna know who Sarah is, but I would not allow myself to do that. I just don't have the extra time. But this is an 1870 census, and I did not find Albert and Mary Jane prior to 1870. So, in my quick look, which might be wrong, but we're gonna pretend like we don't see them before 1870. So, which way should we go? We should go through the path of researching someone who may have been enslaved, because I don't find them prior to 1870. So the very first priority in researching an ancestral line that we believe to have been enslaved is to try to find the slave owner. Now, Rhonda, I can tell you I'm gonna run over. Already, I can tell, because I'm getting ready to ask another question. Okay. And I hope my knees hold up. I usually have a stool, because I forgot to tell her I needed that. So y'all might see me sit down. But anyway, why is it important to find who the enslaver was? Any ideas?
Last names,
It It might be the same last name. No other thoughts?
Parentage.
Let me ask you this. Where'd my water go? Oh. So remember, the enslaver owns our enslaved ancestors, right? Who said that? Raise your hand up. Very good, young lady. That's who has the paperwork. Who holds the papers for your car? Your house? That big 52-inch TV you just bought? And if you're registered with the government for that car, whose name is it under? Yours, right? Same thing here. So if the ancestor is enslaved, we've got to find the enslaver in order to find records about the ancestor. Just a second.
How would you go about finding the enslaver if?
That's what I'm getting ready to tell you. I'm glad you asked. So one of the first places I like to go, and it's good methodology to go, is to the United States Federal Slave Schedules. These were enumerated as Schedule 2 of the federal census in the years 1850 and 1860, and both of them were enumerated as of the date June 1st. So no matter when they came to your house, it could have been months later, the information given is supposed to refer to June 1st. Now on these slave schedules, enslaved persons are not named, but they are enumerated by age, sex, and color under the names of the enslavers. There are also questions that ask whether the person is a fugitive from the state, meaning a runaway, whether they've been manumitted in the past year, whether they were deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic, meaning they had a disability. And in 1860, they added a question about the number of slave houses that enslaver owned. So this is what the slave census, slave schedule looks like from 1860. The only difference between 1850, other than the one extra category, is that in 1850, each column had 42 lines, so you had 84 enslaved persons on a sheet. And in 1860, it went to 40 lines, so you only have 80 people. And what I did is I decided to keep thinking about Albert for a few minutes. Albert Williams, who we just saw in 1870, he was in New Kent County, Virginia. So I went to the New Kent County, Virginia slave schedules, and I pulled all the surnames of Williams enslavers. Because remember, that's the only name I know. I know nothing else. So I'm gonna look for Williams enslavers. And I actually found these people, I think it's 9 here, including the one that doesn't have the S on the end. Because spelling does not count in genealogy, okay? And so what I would have to do is then begin to look at all of these persons in the slave schedule and see if any of them own a 28-year-old male or someone within a 10-year span of that, because remember, these people that are being asked how old they are, they don't really know, and the enslaver doesn't always know either. So he said, well, Albert, he about 28, you know? Right. So we do a 10-year span. Some people, genealogists use an even wider span. I do 10 years. 5 years below, 5 years above. So I'm looking for anybody between the age of 23 and 33 to be enumerated under these people. Now, where I have my little guy with the microscope, that is John R. Williams, the first name on here. And so when I look at John R. Williams, I do see that he has males in the age range for Albert. So I'm gonna hold on to him. He's gonna be one of the people I'm gonna go and do deep research on, looking through his records for any mention of someone named Albert, and probably also someone named Mary Jane. Also, if I go back for just a quick second, let's see. Okay, none of the children were born before emancipation. But I would look for Sarah also, the 74-year-old. I'm gonna search his records, and then I'm gonna do the same thing for any of these who have someone in their slave schedule that matches the age, the gender of the people I'm looking for. So you use these documents to help you narrow down the people that you have to research. Because if John Williams didn't have any male enslaved persons, I'm putting him off to the side. I'm not researching him right now. I might end up coming back to him though, because remember, this is only on June 1st, 1860. He could have bought Albert on June 2nd. He could have sold him on May 31st. So I might have to come back to him, but I need to narrow it down somehow. All right, so how many of you watch Finding Your Roots? All these genealogy shows. All right, we have some friends at Finding Your Roots. I know a lot of the people that do the research. Okay, I know a lot of people do the research. And I've met Dr. Gates several times. One of the things I need you to know is Dr. Gates is not the researcher. He is the TV host. He is reading a script, okay? He tells people, that's your ancestor right there on that line on the slave schedule. It's not. You can't do that unless you have other records that were taken for the same date, the same time, the same enslaver that name your ancestor and give your ancestor's age. Then you can say, that's likely, so-and-so. So please don't take these slave schedules and start naming people without supporting evidence. You're gonna mess everybody's genealogy up. All right, the next thing I like to look at are cohabitation records. It's impossible to find a Virginia cohabitation record that is easy to show in a presentation, but I want you to see what the form looks like because it's amazing. And I am kind of doing mostly Virginia records since that's where your family is. These cohabitation records were created first by the Freedmen's Bureau, but then quickly taken over by some of the states as ways to document and legitimize the marriages of formerly enslaved people after emancipation. Because even though our enslaved ancestors were having marriages and families together, those marriages were not legal, and the children were not legitimate. The children belonged to the owner. They belonged to the owner of the mother. So after emancipation, you got hundreds of thousands of people, married couples, that really aren't legally married. And so this is a way that, this never happens. Let me put this in. This is a way that, that they had to address it legally. And so these cohabitation records in Virginia are all supposed to be as of February 27, 1866. Now in other states, the years were 1866, 67, 68, but each state does things differently, so you have to know what they're doing. But in Virginia, if you are so fortunate as to have an ancestor with a cohabitation record, here's what you get. You get the ancestor's name, the husband and the wife, and then for each of them, you get their age, their place of birth, their current residence, their occupation, the name of their last owner. You don't even have to do the research. It's right there. The last owner's residence, the names of their children with the ages of each child, all on this one little piece of paper, and the date that they began living together as husband and wife. Now most of my research is North Carolina, and we get an actual date. On this particular one, they just have the year, but that's good enough for you to know. And it helps you figure out a lot of stuff. Yes, ma'am?
Can this record be found on Ancestry?
Yes, and Family Search, yes. And I don't mind you asking questions, but I think we have a period at the end. I don't want Rhonda to cut me off, so let's if it's not urgent, let's hold it to the end. But yes, all the records that I'm showing are found online at this time. And when I was doing the research, I had to go traveling, but we've done a lot of work to get these records online now. So of course, I had to look for some of the CLMWWW people. And I know it's not easy to see, but this record is from Goochland County, Virginia.
Yes.
The Register of Colored Persons Cohabitating in 1866. Now, because Rhonda was kind enough to send me some documents about your family, I had this information exactly as it was given to me. Thank you, Christian. The earliest known Woodson ancestor is Dick. Now, you know Dick is a nickname for Richard. He was born before 1825. Based on available records, the Woodson family is from Goochland County. So I went into the cohabitation records looking for Dick or Richard Woodson, and I didn't find Dick, but I did find, I can't see, Emmanuel, and this is Emmanuel on the top line here, and he's 65 years old. He marries a Lucy White, who is 50. And then and he's a farmer. Well, he's providing farm labor, which lets me suggest that he might be sharecropping or he's working for someone else. He doesn't have his own farm. But you go over here to this note, and like I said, I tried to make it as clear as I could, but some records you just can't. Believe me, these records are not beautiful. They're not. It's hard work. But what it says is that he has offspring from a former wife. And it doesn't name the former wife. But your researcher, if he hasn't already, is now gonna know he has work to do. He needs to find out who that former wife was, and also these two children, Mary and William, if they were being funny, they would have put William and Mary, but they weren't being funny. But Mary and William, they are not Lucy's children. And if you didn't know that already, this document provides that information for you. So that's what makes these so wonderful.
You said Emmanuel,
Emmanuel, yes.
and is that Woodson?
Woodson.
Yeah.
And then under Emmanuel is Price Woodson. Now Price is only 21 years old. He marries Maria Hooker, who's only 16 years old. There's no form or anything for them because they're so young, they haven't been married before or had children by anybody else, or at least it's not notated here. Now my genealogist mind is telling me that Price is probably the child of Emmanuel and Lucy. But I can't just decide that and put it on the tree. I have to do what? Research, yes, have to research. So anyway, there you go with them. Oh, those were supposed to be underlined, sorry. All right, the next place you go, remember we're still establishing the slave owner. So you've narrowed down the ones from the census that you want to research, or you found a cohabitation record and you know who the slave owner is. Now you want to look for estate files and probate records because they give the most information, the most helpful information about our enslaved ancestors. So systematically study the records of the ones that you've held on to, who had that same surname unless you knew something different. Narrow your research to a span of years which your ancestor actually lived. I'm trying to give you some information based on my learned experience because when I was doing this 30 years ago, I was researching my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather Calvin was born around 1840. I researched all the Yarborough files from Franklin County, North Carolina, going back into the 1700s. Why? I didn't know a single name. I'm looking for Calvin. He wasn't even born until 1840. So there was no reason for me to be looking at those. So don't do that. Make sure you stay in those years. And also begin with 1865 deaths and work backwards because after 1865, you shouldn't be seeing enslaved persons on anybody's probate records. But I do say that if you have one that you're suspicious of, and it's from right after emancipation, those years, go ahead and check it because maybe the will was not updated. So it's worth checking it. And most importantly, as I've already mentioned, genealogy, the first rule of genealogy is that spelling doesn't count. So don't ignore any variations on spelling. This first line shows you all the ways Yarborough was spelled in the files I was looking at. These are some of the different ways for Coles. There are more. These are some of the different ways for Meekins. And just last night, I found numerous numerous documents in New Kent County that say Meekins and has been corrected to Meekins.
There's other names.
There's others for all of these.
Yeah.
There's others, so you have to research all of them. Don't turn away and say, that's not my family. It probably is. Now, in these estate records, you're going to, and most of them are found in different states, it might be called civil court, chancery court, that's Virginia, and husting courts were early Virginia. You're going to be looking for wills, inventories, bills of sale, division of property, sales and account records. Those are the main record types that you're going to be looking for our enslaved ancestors in. The one you see here is from Anne Arundel County, Maryland. You can see here that the enslaved persons are named, their gender is given, their age is given, and their value at the time of the enslaver's death is given.
Wow.
But they will not always be in a list like that. They will sometimes be right in the manuscript of the document. And that's why I tell you, you have to read every word from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, from the left corner to the bottom corner, and zigzag. Also, any stray marks, any little notes in the margins, you have to read everything. If you don't, then you would miss that on this particular document, there are 31 Negroes of the following names: Abram, Bob, Moses, Elsie, Corey, Caroline, and so on. You would have missed them if you were looking for a list. And yes, our enslaved ancestors are going to be listed right along with other personal property like the longhorn, the short corn, the fodder, the shucks, the hogs, and the cattle, which are actually in a list. Estate records will also show you wills in which enslaved persons are named. So here we have, this is a will from Talladega County, Alabama, for a lady named Mary Chipman, and she's leaving to her beloved son Matthew Turner, her Negro man Albert, and it's just a coincidence, it's not the same Albert, and her Negro girl Ann. And to her beloved son Edwin Childs Turner, she gives and bequeaths her Negro man Isaac. Again, you can't ignore anything. You have to read deep into the documents. This is a bill of sale from Richmond, Virginia. It names two enslaved persons, Martha and her son Edward. It tells you that they were sold for $650 to a Mr. Joseph K. Anderson. Now, these bills of sale typically warrant the enslaved persons as sound and healthy, but there's a note here that they're warranted sound and healthy, except for Martha, who can't be warranted sound and healthy because, like me, she has asthma. There are also so many court papers that you will find mentions of enslaved persons in. Now, in Virginia, you're very fortunate that the work that has been done by the Library of Virginia in conjunction with the Virginia Memory Project has resulted in a website called Virginia Untold. And the sole purpose of Virginia Untold is to bring forth digitization of Virginia's records that involve enslaved persons. There are millions of records on this site that you can see with the click of a mouse. 4 areas that you will find court records, and this is not all of them, these are just kind of the main ones on Virginia Untold, would be petitions for re-enslavement, because there was a law passed in Virginia. It has to do with free people of color being, or people who have been manumitted and become free, who were supposed to leave the state within 12 months, but didn't want to leave their families or the security that they knew, so they would actually petition to be re-enslaved so they could stay in the state.
Wow.
The petitions to remain, those are really a little different, because these are usually free people of color or people who have recently been set free, who they're not asking to be re-enslaved, but they're asking permission to stay in the state beyond that 12 months. Freedom suits are just enslaved people suing for their freedom. just as your ancestor, Elizabeth Meekins, did. And legislative petitions kind of is a mix of everything because that was the early day way for any interactions with the court was recorded through legislative petitions. Also in Virginia, a law was passed that enslaved persons had to pay a tax. I'm sorry, free people had to pay a tax. Hold on, that's later. This is different, I'm sorry. This is a list of slaves and free persons of color that were jailed in the penitentiary. So slaves got arrested for things, free people got arrested for things. They all went to the same jail. This is from June of 1816 to February of 1842. You will get the list of names. Mostly if you see a first name only, that's an enslaved person. If you see a surname, it's a free person of color. But what we need as genealogists is where they lived, where they were sentenced, what their age is, that's important genealogical information, and what the disposition of the case ended up being. Remember, records lead to records. So you find out something on this record, it leads you to look for another record. You also will find, sorry, I'm having clicker issues here, runaway slave ads. These are also heartbreaking but vital pieces of information about our enslaved ancestors, because as you can see, you're gonna get the person's name, you're gonna get their age, you're gonna get a full physical description because they want them to be caught. And again, the all-important name of the owner. And then church records. A lot of people don't know this, but before emancipation, churches were integrated. Everybody went to the same churches. You went to the church your enslaver went to. And there were laws about free people of color gathering in groups, so other than the AME church and a couple of other little trickly churches here and there, free people of color also went to the white churches because it was illegal for them to gather in groups. So you find our ancestors of color in the church records. They're getting baptized, they're getting, relating their experience and asking to join the church. They're getting discommunicated from the church, just excommunicated from the church, just like the white people are. They're in there. So look for the church records in the area that you are studying. All right, now, there's a little bridge that happens here because we're gonna talk about records of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was established by Congress in March of 1865, mostly to meet the needs of formerly enslaved people who are now having to learn to work for themselves, to care for themselves, to, get paid and stand up for their rights and stuff. But the actual name is the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Refugees are white people, for the most part, who have fled their homes during the war and now need help reestablishing themselves, especially since they don't have free labor anymore. And then abandoned lands are lands that were either taken over by the Confederacy or somebody, was killed, their family was killed, so their land's just sitting there. There's a whole lot of reasons for abandoned land. And the original plan for abandoned lands was the 40 acres and a mule. The Freedmen's Bureau was authorized to divide those lands into 40-acre plots and to give them out to formerly enslaved people. But then Lincoln was killed and Andrew Johnson became president, and Andrew Johnson nipped that in the bud just like that and restored any lands that had been given out to their original owners. And there are only a couple of areas in South Carolina, the Geechee Islands, and in northern Florida where that land remained in the hands of our ancestors. So anyway, I wasn't supposed to go into all of that. Anyway, the records of the Freedmen's Bureau has hundreds of categories. I've only put a few here, and I think you've had time to look at them now. These are some of the main categories where we will find our ancestors, and not only find our ancestors, but either find actual statements of who used to own them or be able to make inferences, like the labor contracts. A lot of times, our freed ancestors are going back to work for the same person that used to enslave them. So if you find a labor contract, you want to at least research to see if that might have been the person who enslaved them, if it doesn't state it in the labor contract. Sometimes it will, yes.
Could you just repeat what you said the original name was of the Freedmen's Bureau?
Yes, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. So notice that's Freedmen with an E, and I'll tell you why I'm pointing that out in a second. So here we go, back to the, I really like saying it, the CLMWWW. I had a little dance I was doing. So, you know, I went looking, so here we are back in New Kent County, and this is a letter to Captain N.M. Brooks, Superintendent of the Freedmen's Bureau for New Kent County, Virginia, and it states, Edward, a free colored man with a large family and none able to make a living for themselves, humbly asked for a horse to help him make a crop with which he may be able to sustain his family. Your obedient servant, Edward Meekins, notice the spelling, New Kent County Courthouse, April 12th, and it's 166, which means 1866.
Wow.
This is a jewel. Now, I'm teaching about all this. I don't have any of this for my family. You know, my family's just not in the records, but I'm so happy for those of you who have it. So now what does Christian need to do? Who's Christian got to research? Edward who?
Meekins.
Edward Meekins, where?
You can't get.
New Kent County. Christian, you're gonna be busy.
So let me just share with you, because you've been naming Christian. Christian is my daughter, and she's not here.
Oh, I thought it was him.
No.
I thought you told me you were Christian.
No, I'm Jimmy West.
Oh, you're Jim, but you're a genealogist
Yes.
too. So,
Yes.
is Christian genealogist too?
She is, but
Okay.
she's in law school and working as a librarian.
All right, Christian and Jimmy. I'm sorry. Thank you for that. Well, when he introduced himself, he and nobody was going to say anything. We family now. You know we family now, right? Y'all know that, right? So treat me like family. Don't let me make a fool out of myself. Sorry, Jimmy. Okay.
Yes, she is.
All right.
She's going to law school.
So there's Edward Meekins in the Freedmen's Bureau records. Now, this is the kind of stuff we look at all day long. You see how hard that is? There's bleed through, there's stuff written all on top of each other. But this record is from the Freedman with an A, Freedman's Bank. And that's why I wanted to point that difference out to you. The Freedmen's Bank was also established by Congress, also in March of 1865, but it's a totally separate entity from the Freedmen's Bureau. And as you might guess, the bank was created to give formerly enslaved people somewhere to put their money that they're now making that they weren't making before, and to help them learn how to manage it. But it was also open to depositors. They're white depositors, they're free people who were free before the war, who are depositors. They're organizations, churches, fraternal organizations that all had accounts with the Freedmen's Bank. So it's not just individuals. Well, do I have any Winfreys in here? Any Winfrey descendants?
Yeah, we're all Winfrey.
Everybody's a Winfrey, okay.
Somehow.
Well, this document is for Wilson Winfrey, and that name Wilson seems to go over, you know, several lines of your family. Several different surnames have Wilsons, so I couldn't ignore it, even though this record is from Tallahassee, Florida. And the main reason I couldn't ignore it was because Wilson was born in Virginia. So to save your eyes, I want to tell you about this rich information found. Now remember this, y'all, this is a bank deposit slip. This is an application for an account, actually, more so than the deposit, but they make their first deposit with this slip. But here's what that says right there. The name of the master, John Graves, sold Wilson to Sam Parkle and carried him to Florida with W. Lumpkins 40 years ago. Y'all just don't know.
Wow.
This is a lot. Okay, I'm glad somebody knows. Yes, you know, I tell you know a lot anyway. So yes, this is a lot. This is on a bank application for a bank account. Now, we know his first master, or at least a master, was John Graves. We know he got sold to Sam Parkhill. And then he went to Florida with W. Lumpkins. Does anybody know about Lumpkins Jail?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Devil's Half Acre in Richmond. Now his name was Robert Lumpkins. But no way you're gonna tell me that he's not related to this W. Lumpkins. So what does Jimmy have to do? Research. Every one of these names Jimmy has to research. And Christian. So that they can find information about who? Wilson and his family. Now speaking of his family, they're all named on this document too. I'm not gonna make you try to read it, but he names his spouse, his father, his mother, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his children, and 1 of his siblings. All on this bank application. Y'all got work to do. All right. But did you know, and I know you did know, that in 1860, almost 11% of African ancestor people in this country were actually free. Before the Civil War ever began. Now, this is where I think I'm probably preaching to the choir. But in case there's one little person that doesn't know, the status of all persons followed that of their mother. So if the mother was free, there's a seat up here, sir, and some over there. If the mother was free, the child is born free. It doesn't matter whether you're white, black, Native American. Free mother, free baby. Also, some of them became free because they were manumitted by a previous enslaver. And then several were self-emancipated, meaning they ran away or took it into their own hands.
I like self-emancipation.
Now, along with that self-emancipation category, you have United States Colored Troops soldiers who joined the Union Army. And then you have Civil War contraband who lived in areas of the country that were near Union encampments, and all they had to do was cross in over that line into the Union encampment, and they were considered contraband of war, which began here at Fort Monroe, and could not be returned to slavery. So those are some of the ways that we have so many free people of color. And of course, the ones I'm talking about with the Civil War, that all happened after 1860, so they're gonna take that almost 11% over that line. So in 1850 and 1860, we've already talked about all free people of color are enumerated by name. This is what the census form looks like. And right down here in this corner, I have a family of Meekins.
Claiborne, I remember that name.
This is Claiborne Meekins and Parthenia Meekins.
Yes.
Or however you pronounce it, I'm just reading it. Doesn't matter what the sheet says, it matters what the family knows. So if her name was Parthenia, and if his name was Claiborne, that's what you go with, not by what's on this sheet,
Right.
okay? So you see all the information about them. This is from 1860. This means they are free people of color. They're all enumerated as black except for Claiborne, who's enumerated as mulatto. He is a carpenter. That's his occupation. And the whole family was born in Virginia. Very valuable information on this form. There's also a family next door, Alan and Sally Meekins. You're gonna wanna research all of them. This is Parthenia Osborne Meekins. I don't get to do this. I don't have any pictures of any of my ancestors from this time period. But for you, we can place her picture right next to her on the 1860 census. And this is from y'all's website, so if it's wrong, it's wrong. Okay, so we're wrapping up with talking about how we document now the lives of ancestors who were free people of color. We spend more time on those enslaved ancestors because, and I didn't even touch half of it because there's so much now that's available to us. But remember my introductory statement, I said this is an introductory look at how to research them. So know that there are more resources beyond what I've already showed you for researching enslaved ancestors. But now we're gonna take that other path, that other fork in the road after the before the 1870 census. We're talking now about researching free people of color. Now you're gonna find free people of color in the same records that you find white people in, because they were free. So they're doing business with the courts, they're buying and selling land, they have business ledgers of their own, they have their own estate records in many cases, but there are also several types of documents that are particular to free people of color, and those are the ones we're gonna focus on very quickly. So in many states, blacks were required to register proof of their status as free with the county or city government where they live. This could be in the form of manumission papers, certificates of freedom, court records, or in some places a freedom badge like these you see here that they would have a little string and wear around their neck. These are from Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
If they didn't have proof of their status on them and they were stopped, they could be jailed immediately and sold into slavery. So it was very important that they had whatever it was that they were supposed to have in that area on them. Now in Virginia, free Negroes and mulattoes were to register and re-register every 3 years with the county clerk. This lasted up until the Civil War. Unregistered, as I'd already mentioned, if they weren't registered, see, so before I was talking about you're registered and you just don't have your papers on you, but if you weren't registered, you would be jailed as a runaway slave. These certificates and registers served as their legal identification, so it's just like us having our license on us. This is an example from Nelson County of what one of the registries look like. So this is held at the clerk's office at the county level, and it's part of a big book with pages filled up just like this. I'm only gonna talk about the first one. So there's an example here, Samuel Mayo, age 26 years old, on the 11th of May, 1860, that's the day he came in. He's 6'1" in stature, a light mulatto, so he's light-skinned, and he's real light-skinned, but he's not bright, because there's bright and there's light, okay? He's probably kind of like me, he's just a light-skinned person. Long scar on the knuckle of the left forefinger and the little finger on the same hand. Very detailed. He's stiff and crooked. He has a small scar over his right eye. He was free born in Nelson County, and his fee is paid. Yes, they had to pay to register themselves. They had to pay. Then I found some Meekins. So we are now in Henrico County, right next to New Kent County. And this is the Register of Free Negroes from November 8, 1831. Now this is from before the law was enhanced to require the full description that we just saw here. So you don't see that full physical description, but we do have Delphi Meekins, 32 years old, a black woman. And it says that she was emancipated by the will of John Christian, who you gotta research now. Deceased of New Kent County, and identified by the same. Then you have Patsy Meekins, daughter of, y'all just don't know how I mean, like, it's telling you genealogy. Daughter of Delphi Meekins, she's 4. She's a girl of dark complexion, born free, as appears from the evidence of Elizabeth, and I think this name is Caxton. I wasn't 100% sure on that. That's for them to find out. And Margaret Ann Meekins, who is 15 months old, a girl of dark complexion, and she's also born free, as appears from that same evidence. I believe this is your family. They're not on your family tree. So y'all have some work to do. Especially, even though the record is in Henrico, it says she was freed by someone in New King County.
And a Christian at that.
Yes, and a Christian at that. I have something to tell y'all about that too, but I need to hurry up. Okay, so that was the registry at the courthouse level. This is the paper that they carry around with them. So it's either called a registration or a certificate. And so this one, I just like this name, so I put it in the presentation. It's for Sally Rainbow. I just like her name. A mulatto woman aged about 27 years, 5 feet high, so it's got all that descriptive information. So if she stopped, they can look at the paper and say, do you match this description? If not, you got somebody else's paper. And so it tells that she's been assigned the number 58. Yes, our free ancestors of color were numbered. And you can see the 58 right up there. And it says it in here, she was assigned the number 58. So that's what they had to have on them. Now, our free Negro ancestors were also taxed, just for being alive. So you know you pay your personal property tax on your car? They had to pay taxes on themselves. So in 1801, Virginia passed an act requiring commissioners of the revenue to submit all the names, ages, sex, and place of abode, as well as occupation of the free people of color in their county. And then those people were then sent a tax bill. If they didn't pay their taxes, if they ended up on the free Negro delinquent tax list, it would be the equivalent to being deported today, because the big goal was to get them out of the county. So there was a movement to get the people who were on the delinquent tax list and pay, using the money that's collected from the free Negro tax, pay to deport them to Liberia. So you might be having to look for some of your ancestors going to Liberia if they're on one of these tax lists and you never heard of them again, like for instance, this Emmanuel Meekins.
Wow.
So if they weren't sent away, they were sold. Just for not paying your taxes, you're not free anymore. And so this is actually a list. The following is a list of free Negroes sold by me for their state and county taxes for the year 1837, and were purchased by the following persons. So you have, everybody has a surname because they were free. These are the people that purchased them for these little amounts of taxes. $2 and something, $1 and something, $3 and something.
Who bought Emmanuel
It looks like Joseph T. Childress. I can blow that up a little later, or I'll just send it to you.
I'm sorry. I didn't
It's
see
okay,
that.
no, it's fine. All right, we're wrapping up. I mentioned enslaved persons in the church records. I also told you the free people of color were there too. So go back to those church records and look for your free people of color, like Mary Green, a free woman of color who came forward and related her experience and was received as a candidate for baptism in 1839 at Tanner's Creek Baptist Church in Warren County, North Carolina. They're in there. Newspaper clippings are filled with free people of color. They usually are going to be called as such. So when you do the search, put the name in quotation, and then next to that put in quotations, well, just put the word free, or put free person of color, free man of color, free woman of color, and see what you come up with to narrow down your searches. So one of the things that I found a lot of, especially around Richmond, were these kinds of ads where free persons of color have misplaced their free papers. Well, you know now why it's so valuable to them to have them. So they are offering monetary rewards for those free papers if they're found to be turned into them. $5 was a lot of money in 1848. But that ancestor wants his papers back. But it's amazing to me how many of them were lost. I mean, I would have them stitched into my skin or something, you know.
Or stolen.
Yeah, they could be stolen, yes. And the bottom article is just, is from, actually from Rhode Island, but I'm gonna skip that one for time's sake. So, I took a lot of information out of this presentation because I kept rehearsing it, and it was like an hour and 10 minutes, an hour, 55 minutes, it was too long. I had a time. So I'm gonna just mention some that I took out because I just want you to know about them. Apprentice records are also a wonderful source for finding your ancestors who were free people of color before emancipation, and persons who were people of color after emancipation, whether they had been enslaved or not. You will still find them in apprentice records. In Virginia, you're very fortunate to have something called the Virginia Slave Births Index. There was a law passed in Virginia from 1853 all the way through to emancipation that all county births had to be recorded, whether they were free, enslaved, white, black, native. And so the slave births have been extracted from those records, and they're free and available on Family Search. And they'll tell you the name of the enslaved person, the name of their mother, and the name of their owner, as well as their date of birth. So that's a really unique record to Virginia. There's also a set of books created by a friend of mine, Leslie Anderson, that has the same information, but it's tighter, it's better, but it's also costly. So you can do it for free, or you can pay $45 for Leslie's book. Bastardy bonds were created when an illegitimate child was born, black, white, whatever. They could go to the court and file a bond against the father, so that the father is going to be financially responsible, child support basically, for that child, and not the county. They did everything they could not to have people dependent on the government. And so you will also find rich information naming fathers that you might not have otherwise known the name of in those records. Also, early military records, and we talked about 20th century military records, but the military records that are from the Revolutionary War forward all include people of color. People of color have been involved in every war that this country has ever fought. And so you want to look for those records because you'll find pension files, you'll find land bounty grants, you'll find so much information that you might have never dreamed of, widows' pensions, and specifically United States colored troops from the Civil War. Excellent files, pension files that are 200 pages long and tell you all the business, you know, everything your mama told you don't be telling outside of this house. It's like reading a diary. It's so juicy. Of course, I don't have one for my family. I mean, your family name. All right. And then the last one is called the Confederate Slave Payroll. No, our ancestors did not fight for the Confederacy. If anybody's telling you that, it's a lie. However, the Confederacy did pay for the labor of our ancestors to build their fortifications, to cook for them, to clean for them, to clean up their nasty mess, to make bricks for them, whatever they needed, and the pay went to their enslavers. So that's what you'll see on the Confederate slave payroll, and the reason it means so much to us as genealogists is it identifies the enslaver so we can get the records that we need. So the last thing is to make connections. You want to use online resources and social media to connect with descendants of the slave-owning families and with other researchers who are looking at the same properties, even though you all may not be blood related. Somebody along the way may have personal documents about your ancestors in their possession. You can do this through Facebook, Twitter, DNA testing sites, surname projects, and reconciliation projects. Connecting with other researchers and what I call co-descendants, those ones you're not necessarily related to, leads to the sharing of very valuable information and helps everyone involved. Be open and willing to share information and resources and withhold any judgment, keeping in mind that the descendants of enslavers did not enslave our ancestors. So to the Coles, Lemons, Meekins, Williams, Winfrey, Woodson family. You are so blessed. I hope you will keep doing what you're doing. I hope you will support your family researchers and that seeing the depth of the work today will encourage some of you to want to get involved with it and become a research team. That is what's happening with a lot of families now. I'm jealous of it. Nobody in my family is interested. But if you become a team with your genealogist or genealogists, it's gonna benefit this family greatly. Share your stories, your photos, your documents. Get up in your grandparents' attic, see what's there. Look between the mattresses, look in the old desk, go down in the basement, open that crate, and whatever you find, give it to Jimmy or Christian or whoever. They will know what to do with it. Don't say, oh, we don't even know who this is. I'm not giving them that picture. They will find out. They need to find out. And then support your family ministries. I thank Rhonda, when I asked her to share with me a little bit about the family, she shared a lot. And so I know more, than I even wanted to know. But the Ronald A. Meekins Sympathy Card Project, what an amazing, amazing ministry to your family. Please support that project. Please support the Ted Herman Meekins Birthday Project. You just don't know. Like, I live alone, and my children and grandchildren don't live near me, and I wake up in the morning on my birthday, and I wait. Because they don't get up as early as I get up at like 5 o'clock. So I just wait and wait and wait, and somebody finally will call me around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock and say, happy birthday, Mom. But I'm waiting. It's my birthday.
Yeah.
So this is such a blessing. Please support that project. And last but not least, your family reunion is a ministry. It is a ministry to yourselves. It is a nod of respect to your ancestors, and it is a gift to the children of your family and those who will come after you. So I had a whole thing written down that I was going to say here at the end, and I just am going to read it because now I'm all messed up. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Rhonda and to the Reunion Committee for inviting me to be your speaker. Congratulations on your 40th anniversary reunion. Give that a hand. Your family is truly blessed to have such a legacy of love, unity, and knowledge of your shared history. My prayer is that what I've shared with you today has served to spark interest in some and continue the thirst in others in exploring your family's ancestry. I pray that you will continue to learn more about your past so that together you can continue to grow forward into a beautiful future and to continue to pass the amazing legacy of the Coles, Lemons, Meekins, Williams, Winfrey, and Wooden family on to future generations. Thank you.
So, has everybody, there's some questions that we have.
Okay, I'm gonna sit down for your questions because my knees hurt.
Okay. So, Jimmy, do you mind if we,